glowing. Hi! I'm so glad you're here. I've talked in the past about how much I like fairies and mythology and folklore and fairy tales and all that kind of stuff. And last year I made a fairy costume and I made these little wings to go with it, and they're okay. I think I can do better. So I thought it'd be kind of fun to try making fairy wings at 3 different price points with kind of different methods and just kind of see what method I like the most. I want to say what method I like the most, not which one works best, because that could be affected by user error, which is very likely. So I'm gonna say I'm exploring which one I like the best. We're going to compare a secondhand / thrifted version, a dollar store version, and a craft store version. I think the instinct is to say that the craft store ones will look the best, but you never know. I usually use a lot of thrifted stuff in my projects, so I think we'll still have a lot of fun with the thrifted version. The dollar store version, I'm not sure what we're gonna do there because the supplies I grabbed, it might be a little bit interesting. And if I have time, once all of the wings have been created, I'll make some outfits to go with them, but we'll figure that out later. First, we need fairy wings. To make our thrifted fairy wings, we'll be using some pantyhose, 4 wire hangers, and some pliers to bend the wire into shape. I got the pantyhose for about 50 cents, and I already had the hangers on hand, and they were a little tricky to unwind, but once that part was done, things bent into shape pretty well, and then I just had to do it 3 more times. Once all of the hangers were straightened out, it was time to bend them into a different shape, so I took some packing paper, measured how tall I wanted the wings to be, and drew the shape with a marker. In this template, I'm including a U-shaped piece in between the wings that will slip into the top back of my shirt or dress, helping give the illusion that the wings are just coming out of my back, and it's how they stay on my person. Next, I simply bent the wire into shape using the template lines as a guide and tracing it with the wire. It was kind of difficult to bend, but that's good because it means it's strong and the wing will hold its shape. I repeated the process to make 2 full wings, consisting of 4 parts, using 1 hanger per part that all join in the middle at the U. To temporarily hold them together, I used plain old Scotch tape to make sure they didn't fall apart while I worked on the rest of it. I then took some thrifted green bias tape to tightly wrap it around the wire U shape, which will not only help keep it all together, but will also make it more comfortable to wear. You could just use hot glue to keep the ends together, but I tried my best to stick to the second-hand theme, and hot glue isn't something I've come across while thrifting very often, so instead I used a needle and thread I thrifted and stitched the ends into place. Time for tights. A risk you run with thrifting is the condition of whatever you grab being less than stellar, and it was apparent that these tights were very used and old. And dusty. But after I pulled the tights onto the wire frame, I just cut the dirty part off and tied the end with a simple knot. Once I had stretched the tights all the way down, I cut the excess and secured it with a few stitches. Then I realized that to cover 4 wing pieces, I actually needed 2 pairs of tights, 1 wing per leg. So I grabbed another that I had on hand, got a coupon that expired in 1985. After adding some more bias tape to cover and secure the tights in place, all 4 wing pieces were constructed, and I was very excited, because I now had fairy wings. But even more exciting was that I now had a blank canvas to decorate. So I started by painting the wings green. Paint is probably not super commonly found in thrift stores, but I've seen acrylic craft paints more often than I've ever expected to while thrifting, so we're gonna paint them. The tights absorbed the paint very quickly, often leaving a mark wherever the first brush stroke was, so I watered down the color a lot and tried to really blend it with the brush. I painted some leaf-like patterns in the middle and then hung them to dry overnight. The next day I came in to check and realized I should have put a drip pan or bowl underneath the wing because I now have a lovely little green spot on my carpet from where it dripped. So fellow fairies, beware. They were still a little wet, so I got to work on the dollar store wings. For these, I tried using zip ties for the support piece since they didn't have any wire, some translucent cellophane, and Mod Podge, which they surprisingly had, to glue it all together. I pulled the zip ties through almost entirely, leaving just a little loop at the end that would eventually be connected to a U-shaped piece like on the other wings. I decided to draw some dragonfly-inspired shapes, and the translucent cellophane was a little plain, so I took some vinyl from my stash that I got at the dollar store months ago and cut it into a weird little pattern to go in the center and make it look a little more interesting. Technically it's iron-on vinyl, but it would just be glued to the layers, so that wouldn't really matter. To hold them together, I slathered the Mod Podge all over the cellophane to sandwich them together, holding the vinyl and the zip tie in between. I added an extra layer of cellophane with more Mod Podge to hopefully add some structure to it, but I don't really know if this is going to work. But all I had left to do was let it dry, so I moved on to the craft store wings. For the craft store wings, I got 2 coils of 14 gauge wire, a roll of iridescent blue cellophane, and the instructions I found online said to use spray adhesive, and this is the only kind I had on hand, so I crossed my fingers and got to work. First I drew a wing template on the packing paper again, adding lots of swirly details in the middle, hoping to make them very decorative. Then I set to work bending the wire into the wing shape, and despite grabbing 2 coils of wire, I didn't end up having enough to do all of the spirals I drew, so I just made 3 per wing and secured everything in place with some hot glue. I repeated the process for the second wing, and joined them both in a U-shape in the middle, just like the other wings. Then I rolled out the cellophane, placed the wire wings onto it, and spritzed the entire surface with the glue. It was kinda gloopy in a few places, and the spray isn't as fine as I think it's supposed to be, but it was too late, so I went ahead and sandwiched the wire with the second piece of cellophane. Flipping it all over, I glued the other wing together, and set some books and boxes on top of them to try and keep them flat. While waiting for the other wings to dry, I decided to keep decorating the second-hand wings with some thrifted embroidery floss, flowers, and leaves. I do still feel like they were missing something in the end, but I also could have decorated them for a long time until they were completely covered, so instead I stopped myself there. After working on those for a few hours, I checked on the craft store wings, and they were not drying at all. That's when I remembered I was supposed to also use a heat gun or an iron to help shrink the cellophane around the wire. So I laid out some plain cotton fabric to act as a barrier between the iron and the cellophane, and gently pressed the iron to the wings. They did seem to come together more after this was done, so to better hang them to dry, I trimmed the extra material around the edges. With 1 pair of wings complete, and 2 hopefully drying off to the side, I called it a night. The next day I found the dollar store dragonfly wings still just as wet as when I left them. They were a Mod Podgy mess, so I abandoned them, knowing that they would not be done in time, or possibly ever. To my surprise, the big wings also weren't entirely dry, and the wire was very weak, too weak to support the weight of the wings. So after abandoning the dragonfly wings, I was left with the decision, do I make a new pair of wings? Yes. I found 4 more wire hangers and decided to make an entirely new pair. Although, out of curiosity, I did take a scrap piece of cellophane and decided to test to see if I had just ironed the cellophane, would it have held on to the wire without any glue, since the glue has been a problem. But it didn't work. So at least I knew my previous mistake of forgetting about the iron wasn't the only problem I had on my hands, or wings. For this unexpected pair of wings, I decided to try a different shape and method, structured simply at the top with 1 wire and sewn fabric hanging down freely. And to do this, I used some thrifted tulle I had in my stash. I drew the shape on the paper first, then held the layers in place with some hot glue so they wouldn't shift while I was sewing them together. After trimming the excess tulle, I sewed the layers together, making a tube at the top to hold the wire. I then wrapped the U in the center with some gold ribbon, and they looked pretty fun already, but they definitely needed some decorating, so I took out my bin of miscellaneous odds and ends and decided to use pearls and yellow gems. With a silicone mat underneath, I used hot glue to attach the gems so that they just had to peel off of the mat once the glue had cooled. I also gave the blue wings some support with wire from an extra hanger and wrapped the U with a blue ribbon. At this point, with all 3 pairs of wings done, I decided to go ahead and make some simple dresses to wear with each of them because I knew I had the perfect bed sheets to use. For the green wings, I had this greenery and butterfly printed sheet that I got from an estate sale. For For the gold wings, I pictured a more costumey outfit, so I used this interesting printed remnant I thrifted recently to make a top with flowy cape sleeves using some blue fabric that I've had for a couple years. To accompany the blue wings, I was recently given this vintage blue floral bedsheet that I thought would be perfect. So I cut everything out that night and got to sewing the next day. First up, I made the green dress, making a long circle skirt and puff sleeves. I hemmed the neckline with a leaf patterned stitch, and for the sleeves, I wanted a kind of ruffly edge, so instead of making a tube to feed the elastic through, I used a zigzag stitch on top of the elastic, stretching it out underneath the needle as I went along, so that when it's released, it scrunches up. When I held it up, I was a little worried it would be kind of short, but then I remembered that once the skirt is attached, that wouldn't matter and it would look fine. Instead of a proper hem, I zigzag stitched over the raw edge of the skirt and covered it with lace, though I had to switch colors right at the end. Next, I put the blue dress together. I started with the skirt this time, and the same thing happened with the lace hem. I was so close to being done and had to switch colors near the end because I, yet again, ran out. But we'll call that odd little touch character and move on. Speaking of character, this sheet had a lot of holes in it to mend and a pretty noticeable stain on the skirt, so I decided to cover that up with a pocket. Now I wanted this dress to have an off-the-shoulder bodice to go with this twirly circle skirt, and even though I've used this blouse pattern multiple times in the past, it never ceases to confuse me, and I do it slightly wrong every time, but you know what? As long as it's functional and it looks alright, it's fine. A few sneezes and stitches later, the blue dress was complete. I did also start on the top for the gold wings, but I completely forgot to film the process, so with that, everything is done, and it's time for the reveal. Learned a lot. To wrap this up, I'm going to kind of rank the wings that I made. Number 3, or perhaps number 4, is my attempt at the dollar store wings, because they're still not dry. That approach didn't work at all. I think the zip ties would have held up with how light the material is, but using the Mod Podge as the adhesive between 2 sheets of plastic was just never going to work. It was never going to dry because there was no way for air to get to it. So yeah, I'm probably going to take those apart completely and try and salvage the iron-on vinyl that I cut out and the zip ties to use for boning. We tried it, it didn't work, that's okay. Now the real number 3 is probably, surprisingly, the craft store wings. They're fine. I think they're a good first attempt at the process, but very crinkly. Between the dollar store ones and these craft store wings, I think the biggest lesson I learned is that the right adhesive is key. A few years back, I purchased spray-on Elmer's adhesive, and I thought I still had some in my stash. Turns out I did not, and when I went to the craft store, it was $15 for a bottle, and I was already well over budget with the wire, so I didn't get any, thinking I've got a spray glue of some sort, I have to. And I did, technically, technically it was glue, and technically it sprayed. But that E600 stuff was just so gloopy. Took forever for it to dry, and I don't even know if it's dry. I don't think it is. I don't think it's dry yet. Ironing it helped. I forgot about the heat gun / ironing part of the process that I had researched, and I'm glad I remembered when I did, because they, like my dollar store ones, would still be drying. So I should have just gotten the Elmer's adhesive. It comes out in such a fine mist and doesn't gloop up. I think that's why that's the glue you should use when you do it. I do like the color. The nice like iridescent sheen to it is very nice, and the shape and the size is very fun. That being said, I do have to be very careful when I'm wearing them because I feel like they're going to fall apart at any second. Because of that, they're number 3. Number 2 is my gold pair. I only made them because my third pair of wings wasn't working, and so I felt like I had to have a trio to round out the project because I had set in my mind that I was making 3 pairs of wings. So when the dollar store pair didn't work, I felt like I had to supplement it somehow with something, so the gold wings were born. They're reliable. I can wear them pretty easily. They just kind of float there. They're very lightweight, and they were fun, which means our number 1 pair is the thrifted pair. They're so cute, and I think they're pretty durable. Now, thrifting hosiery can be a little strange because the 1 pair was used, which was a little gross, not gonna lie, but you know, you cut that part off and you move on. And I'm so glad that it worked out because I think the wings are adorable. Because of the nylons, they were fun to both paint and embroider, so there was just so much that could be done. They're reliable. I can wear them and feel like they're not going to fall apart. Which brings me to the second most important lesson I learned is the wire. The wire is key to making any of these work because when I was doing my research, it said 12 or 14 gauge wire, so I bought, I think 14, and it wasn't strong enough. These could not sit up on their own. So the 14 gauge wire was good for the detail part of the wings. They haven't really bent out of shape or anything, but to hold them up from the back piece, they needed a stronger base and a stronger wire to kind of hold them up because they were drooping every time I tried to put them on. So the thrifted wings have won my heart, but really I love them all, and I like the outfits that I made for each pair. And if you do too, you can let me know by hitting the like button. And if you want to see what I'm doing next and join the channel, hit the subscribe button. And if you want to know when I post, hit the notification bell and YouTube will let you know. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye!